Friends, it's great to be here. I know that I'm coming in on the back end of this journey of rest that you guys have been on. I actually got to listen to one of the messages on the way down here this morning. I had a bit of time to kill in the car, and I think it was Katrina from Cape and Ray. Does that sound right? She went on the journey of Hebrews 4 with you guys. But I guess I want to try and come at this idea of rest today, which is such an expansive topic, through the lens perhaps of our restlessness. And so we're going to sort of see what sort of comes from that as we explore God's Word together. I was thinking about what Katrina was sharing because she's sharing from this idea of today when you listen to my voice, God says, do not harden your hearts. Which David, speaks of in Psalm 95, because he's quoting, Deuteronomy, where God says, go into the land, and they come back and they say there's giants, and what happens? People lose their nerve. They literally have a failure of nerve. Their hearts harden. They become disobedient, and it's only Caleb and Joshua that get to go in. And the scriptures say that it was because Caleb was still wholehearted. There was something that he hadn't lost in the knowledge that giants were before them. Today, as you listen to my voice, do not harden your hearts. So I pray that we would have soft hearts to hear what God might be saying to us today. I hate admitting this, but about 5.5 years ago, I hit a wall that I didn't bounce off very easily, and emotionally, physically, realised that I'd probably been living outside of my limits for way too long, carrying the burden of ministry in a very tough community, and suddenly I realised all my emotional resources were used up and I was drawing from a very empty well. And so I ended up not travelling too well for a season, and I went to a spiritual mentoring cohort, and a woman was there. And at one point, we had to write our life goals, and I just remember sitting there going, the last thing that I want to do right now is write my life goals. I'm not even sure if I want to do life. And this almost prophetic moment where just a person who was perhaps being present and listening just gave me this little note, and I read it, I opened it up, and it just said, Nathan, rest. It's time to rest. Rest in God, rest with your family, rest in nature. Your heart needs a rest. And long story short, we ended up going back to what was my homeland, a little place at the bottom of Australia called Tasmania. And we got to stay in a little shack in a place called Boat Harbour for about 12 weeks, my family and I. And lots and lots of stories I could share, but I guess just a moment that never escaped me was that I was sitting in our little shack one night, and it was literally a shack, and I think we were sharing it with rats and all sorts of other furry animals that were running through the roof. And I'm reading Henri Nouwen's Sabbatical Journey, and as I'm reading, at one point, just this one line just grabbed my attention, grabbed my heart. It said, what, Nathan, and maybe put your own name here, what if I could let go of everything that makes me feel useful and significant? See, I didn't have many problems. I just needed to prove myself and couldn't have any needs and needed to work harder, and just thought the answer to my problems was just to keep pushing, and I had pressure on myself because I wanted our ministry to be a success, and just little stuff like that. And suddenly now, and with God's Spirit, says, Nathan, what about if you could let go of everything that makes you feel useful and significant? I want to share a story, and I'm going to share it in two parts because hopefully as I share, if you sort of go somewhere else in your mind or you're thinking about lunch, you'll know that, there's this other part of the story that hopefully I'll hear before the end of the message. And it's about a friend of mine. I'll just call him, he's a brother in Christ, so I'll just call him brother, just to protect his identity. But He came over to my house recently. He's a friend he walked into our community cafe about 10 years ago, the little missional space that we created in our community. And we met and our eyes locked and we shook hands, and something of the Spirit of God showed up in that moment, and something arrested his heart, captured his imagination, and within months he'd given his life to Christ. He's a returned serviceman. He's probably a year younger than me. He did a stint in East Timor, the Solomons, and he did 3 tours of Iraq and Afghanistan. And he's sitting at my dining table the other day, and he's on a very, he's been on the journey of just trying to deal with his own post-traumatic stress. But more so, suddenly things that he thought he could kick against, when God says to Paul, it's futile to kick against the goad. What's a goad? That little prong that you sort of poke into the bullock as you're maybe trying to get a furrow for the farming. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. As you're ploughing, and you have your pointer, and you sort of just keep pointing, and every now and then, the bullock or the draft horse or just decides to kick back, stop pointing me, and what does it do? You end up becoming mutilated in the process, like it hurts you. My friend's sitting there with me, and he's going, I don't even know why I'm getting up at the moment, because as someone who's been on many adventures in life, his body's starting to shut down. He's looking now at back surgery. There's all these sort of physical challenges that are coming up as he sits in his journey of trauma. As now he's had to go, I've been trying to not take medication for 10 years, and now I'm taking medication. And all these things are just starting to bite a little bit in his story. And someone who's found, he's been very useful, and he's liked to be useful for others. And suddenly now, where do I get my validation when I'm no longer able to do the things that I thought made me feel good or brought me life? What do I do now? So he's sharing this story with me, and it's just, we're spiraling, and he's when we go into unhealth, for all of us, the things that perhaps are dormant in us become the big things, and for him it's perfectionism. And perfectionism can become a terror. It can become something that sort of just follows you around. And so he's now, as he's feeling worse, his perfectionism's becoming, heightened. And so he's not travelling well as we share a meal together at my dining table. What does it mean when we feel useless? When suddenly we don't really have much to offer anymore? And we almost feel like we've just become a burden. We're a burden on society. My friend is getting an income that he's not working for now through Department of Veterans Affairs, and he hates himself for it. There's a lot of self-loathing happening because he's not earning his income. He's just being paid to sit at home. What does that do to a 42-year-old's heart? My Latin's pretty bad, so I'm not going to try and tell you what that says. But I've been reading another, a person who we know as a spiritual doctor in the journey of faith. His name was Augustine. Kicked around the streets of northern Africa and went on a bit of a journey of trying to find himself. Went to Rome, ended up in Milan for many years, and he was on this quest. You could almost say that he was on a conquest. Many of us sort of only know good things perhaps about Augustine, but he was definitely a naughty little boy. He was up to mischief, and he was out to try and, he was going to sort of tell the world who he was going to be. And at one point, he makes this statement. And the statement translates, I am a burden to myself. Often we carry around a burden or a weight And sometimes we carry the weight of the world. For others, we carry the weight of other people's burdens. But Augustine had hit a wall in his own journey. Perhaps he was sitting in a shack somewhere, realised it wouldn't have been a shack, it was probably a pretty nice, little day spa in Milan somewhere, and suddenly he's gone, I'm the burden. Like, I can't seem to leave me. I just keep following myself around, and I can't let go of this. What do I do? Now, Augustine, probably they wouldn't have used the language of existentialist then, but at some point in our history, this philosophy of existentialism had sort of kicked in. And Augustine, perhaps, he was the father of this. Let me just read to you what existentialism is, and think about it in terms of our own our cultural moment right now, our post-modernity right now. So existentialism emphasizes the existence of an individual person as a free and responsible agent, determining their own development through acts of will. What that tells me, if I can just break that down, because it's always hard to hear a statement from the dictionary, but I'm my own person, I'm self-constructed, I'll do what I want, and I don't want society to tell me what to do. I'll kick against the goad, I'll push against anything that's a boundary, because my will is actually what is God. And Augustine, he hits a point in his story, in his journey, and he says, actually, I thought I was going to go and find life, I was going to leave home, I was going to leave mum and dad, and I've found conquest, perhaps like the writer of Ecclesiastes. I've tried to find meaning in everything, and what's happened? It's become meaningless. It's vanity of vanities. Now, who's my friend who's found, is it you, sir? Found a scripture in Genesis?
Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crop for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me."
Sometimes we've got to go back a long way to remember that life hasn't perhaps changed very much. Here's the story of Cain, who offers his gift to the Lord from the land, and his brother Abel, who offers from his stock, maybe his rams or sheep. And something about Abel's offering is good, and something about Cain's offering doesn't please the Lord. And we don't necessarily know what that is. But sometimes I wonder, I've been thinking about, when we're already sowing bitterness in our life, or when we're already sowing deceit, or when we're already sowing things that aren't bringing a heart alive, a whole heart like Caleb. Perhaps when Cain brought his offering to God, it wasn't the tangibleness of the grain. Perhaps it was his heart that God could see. Cain, your heart, it's dark. Your heart is against. Your heart is jealous. Your heart is lusting for things that aren't bringing you wholeness. And I see it. I see your sacrifice. And so what's Cain do? He takes his brother out into the field and he slays him. Now, I don't want to get caught up in this story, but I want to use it almost as a reflection for us this morning to think about. Because at the point where God confronts Cain, two things happen. Cain, he's cast out. So there's another casting out post Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden. Now Cain's been cast out of two things. a sense of place, a belonging, and a sense of whose he belongs to. Cain becomes nowhere and a nobody. And not just a nobody, friends, he's nobodies. He belongs to no one. And what's the fruit of Cain's sin? He's deemed a restless wanderer or a wayfarer. He belongs nowhere. You know, Augustine said, "Oh, the twisted roads I have walked." And it's interesting that this person that sort of found, Plato and, sort of the early Rome and all the thinking that was happening, and then went off to Milan. And he, at some point in Milan, heard Luke's gospel and heard this story of a prodigal son. And he saw something of his own story, not just his own story, but everyone's story, through this one story. And here's a guy, a bit like Cain, who says, "You're dead to me now, and I'm going to go on an adventure, on a journey, and I'm going to find myself." Now, we know this story, and we know sort of how that ends up, but there's something here of the heart that says, I'm okay on my own, thanks very much. I don't need your will to be in my life. I'm going to be free in my own. Perhaps the prodigal, the younger son, was the earliest existentialist that we have in the New Testament. So something of this story grabs Augustine and his story. So we've got some parallel stories here happening this morning. And in his book, On the Road with St. Augustine by James K.A. Smith, which I've been reading recently, as you can probably tell, Smith says this, and he quotes Augustine in it. "Just as the prodigal son spends down his inheritance to nothingness, so the wandering, ravenous soul consumes everything and ends up with nothing. No identity, no centre, no self." Just think of my mate for a moment, sitting at my dining table, who for years served his country, met Jesus. His solution for many years was alcohol. You know, we often think that, the answer's Jesus. No, his answer was alcohol. Desire, use, repeat. But that takes you down a hole to what? To nothingness. And then he finds Jesus. And suddenly he realizes something. Perhaps my will for my life isn't going so well. Perhaps this isn't working out for me. And now I've met another who says, "I have a will for your life. Not your will, but my will." But the prodigal, Augustine, Cain, perhaps us, in some sense, we kick against that. We push it against that and we go, "God, I'm okay, thank you very much. I can probably do this on my own. I'm going to be okay in my own usefulness. I'm going to find my own significance." And this is where the prodigal ends up. The distant country where the prodigal ends up isn't just far off and lonely, it dissolves, it fragments, it liquefies. Augustine says, and this is a quote now, "I was storm-tossed," he says, "gushing out, running every which way, frothing into thin air in my own filthy affairs. I had left myself and I couldn't find me. I turned myself into a famished land that I had to live in." You ever felt like you're sitting in a shack in the bottom of Australia and you're famished? That you've got nothing left? Perhaps even worse than that you belong nowhere and that you belong to no one? One of the greatest fears that we have, if we can burrow down deep into our emotional system, is that we will be alone. That no one's coming for us. That no one's got our back. That we have to figure this out ourselves. And this is the problem of existentialism. It's the problem perhaps of modernity and post-modernity. It's the problem right now is that we're asking our children to just figure it out yourself. Go and find your own path, and the road is life, and all these mantras. And we get to the end, and we realise that there's no self in me that I can find. It's actually firm. I'm not grounded into anything. It's just sort of all like, sort of trying to clasp onto straws. And I'm famished. My brother sitting at my kitchen table is saying, Nathan, I don't know who I am anymore, and I don't know whose I am. What is my purpose now that I can't do the things that I used to do? What is my purpose now when honour is such an important, narrative in my life? And how do I give honour when I can't even, help a mate anymore, it seems? Jesus had a yoke. Now, we often think of a bullock yoke when we think of this passage in Matthew 11. Come to me, all ye who are weary, and I'll give you rest for your souls. But a yoke was an idiom in the first century that every rabbi had. Every rabbi had a yoke, and it was their teaching. It was their corpus. It was the thing that they said, come and follow me, and I will teach you, and you will come under my yoke. You will come under my teaching. Now, here's the difference between Jesus and perhaps every other rabbi that's ever lived before or after him. The difference between everyone else's yoke and Jesus' yoke is this. He had an easy yoke. He had an easy yoke. I'd like you guys to be brave for a moment. I'm just going to say these words, and I'd love you to verbally, not rhetorically in your head, verbally sing out what strikes you about this statement. When Jesus says this, come to me, all ye who are weary, or all of us who are weary, and I will give you rest for your souls. I'm going to say it again. What strikes you? Just one word perhaps. Come to me, all you who are weary, for I will give you rest for your souls. What's one word?
Relief.
Come, relief. Peace. It's free. Say that again. Invitation. Come, relief. It's free. Invitation. Peace. Caring. Anything else? Welcome. Beautiful. Embrace.
If it's for our souls, it will affect our whole life.
Come on. Okay. You should be preaching. It's beautiful. If it's for our souls, and it's our whole life, it's our whole heart. When we harden our hearts, think about that. Today when you listen to my voice, do not harden your hearts as they did in the wilderness. We shut down our souls. So friends, when I hear this, I hear two things. That it's gift, it's given. Listen to this. I will give you rest. Cain is on the road. He's trying to find who he is. How is he going to do that? Like it's this restlessness that we sit in, that we fight against, that we kick against. I'm restless. I'll do we heard distraction and entertainment today. I'll just do another course. I'll go on another trip. It's just like it's forever just churning away. I can't be present. I can't be here because this is like a pretty scary place to be. So I'll just be everywhere else. And Jesus says, I will give you rest. You're not a self-constructed I. You're not something that's just popped out of the ether. You are a given self. The Trinity in love before the creation of the world says, we've got this idea. And out of love, we create, and we already know your name. You are not unknown to us. You are given. Come to me. Don't go to Milan. Come to me. Don't go looking for love in all the wrong places. But it all, that sounds great, God, but sometimes we go to the wrong places to realize that we are famished. Sometimes we have to end up at the end of our rope to realize that maybe this isn't as good as it gets. That Jesus offering to us, his yoke is that it is easy because it's given and it's gift. I can't earn this gift that he gives. And think about Cain, He belongs nowhere and he's nobody's. And Jesus says, I want to change all this. You are not alone. And you are not nobodies. It requires, wait for it, dependence. All my learning and training and thinking, and probably all of your learning and training and thinking, is that we're going to grow up to be these little autonomous, souls, and we're going to just be able to be independent, and we're not really going to need anyone else. And autonomy is killing us, friends. We actually need a body. I look around this group of people, and many of you I've never met, and I can already see that there's different ages, there's different thinking, there's different wisdom, there's different learning. We need each other. I'm not much good on my own. I have one little gift perhaps to offer, but on my own it seems meaningless. You have a soul, Jesus says. Not just come and hang out with me and we'll have, great coffee together. No, I will give you rest for your soul, because your soul is restless till it finds its rest in me, until it finds its place back to the Father again. You probably have heard this story. Perhaps it's been mentioned in these last few weeks, but there's a pastor still, he's still alive, called John Ortberg. He's written a great, really easy but quite profound book called Soul Keeping. And he's a pastor of a megachurch in the States, as they always are. They're always pastors of megachurches. Then they see the light. And he's been hanging out with this guy called Dallas Willard, who's become a bit of a sort of mentor, philosopher to his soul. And, it's just like life is full and he cannot see anymore. And there's no overflow, and it's just like the next thing. And he calls Willard and he says, right, I just need some wisdom. Just, what do I do? What do I do, Dallas? And Dallas takes a very long pause. And I had the privilege of sitting in a lecture week with Dallas Willard a few years ago, and he's very, very slow. And he's thinking about Ortberg's question. What do I need? What do I do? Quick. And Willard says, John, you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And Ortberg goes, great, that's good. What else? Willard says, there's nothing else. Hurry is the greatest. It is against you, and it's the greatest threat to your spiritual life. Hurry. And a mentoree of Ortberg, John Mark Comer said, so why am I in such a hurry to become someone that I don't like? Why am I in such a hurry? Friends, as I drove down the Hume Highway today, I don't know if it was Jesus or just my imagination, but not one, three cop cars drove past me, 3 police cars. And when you're just starting to feel a little tense, like I just did probably stop breathing for a couple of minutes. And it was just, they were obviously maybe going back to base, I'm not sure, but it was 3 police cars. And suddenly I'm ruthlessly eliminating hurry from my life. 118 became 110 very quick, let me tell you that. Now, we have this beautiful body of work called the Psalms, and often in the Psalms there is salah, there is rest, there is pause. And for the next minute, I'd just like you to pause, because I've already said a lot, and I'm sort of jumping all over the place here. I've talked about a friend of mine, I've talked about Augustine, I've talked about Cain, I've talked about my own breakdown, I've talked about this guy called Dallas Willard. I've talked about this idea that sometimes our restless hearts are looking for a place, and they're looking to belong. And I'd just like you to just take a minute, and what's sitting for you right now? We're about 3/4 of the way through, I'm nearly done, but what's capturing your heart right now? Just have a minute. Good to reflect, otherwise it's just information and it's meaningless. I was sitting with a young person in ministry, young woman the other night who was just come home from holiday. It's I think the 4th holiday this year, her and her family, hubby and family, and 2 weeks in, tired. I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed. And I'm thinking, leisure isn't going to fix this. Because we equate in our society rest with leisure. You know, my friend who was sitting at my dinner table, he's taken up surfing as a way of trying to be present and trying to go and do something good for his body. And he said, Nathan, I went on a 3-day sort of surfing trip last week, and I camped in one spot. And I'm driving around, and this is some of his anxiety talking, right? So he's like, I'm driving to every beach, and I'm like paddling out, and I've got to catch a wave, and and it's just his anxiety is building. And this thing that's meant to be a grace, it's meant to be freedom and an invitation to rest and to be in the womb of God, the salinity of the ocean, which is the direct, exact same space as a womb. This place of being in the womb of God. And he's just kicking against the goad. Self-loathing, not catching the wave, not doing a very good job, working really hard, and now I'm exhausted. That's leisure, apparently. We equate leisure with rest, instead of resting in God and His security and sovereignty. See, I'm trying to do this on my own, friends. I'm trying to figure this journey out on my own. I keep trying to enact my will on life, and I think that I'm going to find the answer somehow, and it's not working out very well. Jesus says, come to me, Nathan. I will give you rest. This is not something I can do for myself. I can go to bed for 12 hours and wake up and I can still be tired. All our fixes aren't fixing our restless hearts. I just read this for any millennials that are here. But this idea that burnout isn't a place to visit and come back from, it's our permanent residence. You know, there is this sense, I have a beautiful 12-year-old daughter, and we go to dinner with my folks on Friday night, little birthday dinner for my 3-year-old nephew, and my 12-year-old daughter says to my mum and dad, which, you know, can imagine how this goes down, she's like, they go, how are you? You know, she goes, I am so stressed. And I'm thinking, I'm so stressed. Because we just swim in it now. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not the womb anymore, it's just the ocean is anxiety. And our kids are trying to regulate in this permanent residence, a famished land. I've got to find my own reality here. I push on very quickly. I'm obviously a big fan of Henri Nouwen, but he talks about In the Way of the Heart, which is a profound little book about that thick, where he calls us the invitation of the desert to flee, be silent, and pray. And he talks about the prayer of the hesychasts. That's a good Greek word, and my Greek's terrible, but it's a good Greek word. And in the letter of Thessalonians that Paul writes, where he says, pray always, or pray unceasingly, it literally translates, come to rest. Think about this for a moment. Prayer, the unceasing prayer, the communion, being in the womb of God, is to come to rest. And he says, this rest has little to do with absence of conflict or pain, because sometimes our idea is, well, if I go on a surfing trip and, I'm going to flee all this stuff, work's busy and life's a bit crazy, and there's, the fires that are happening right now in the States, and you guys, I know, have experienced that here. And if I can just get away from all this, if I can just go to Milan perhaps and have a day spa, I'm going to be okay. It doesn't work. It's a false economy. And Nouwen says, friends, it's in the daily struggle. It's in the midst of the very intense daily struggle where I go, Jesus, I can't do this on my own. I'm not very good at this. Could I trust in you? Could I rest in you? Could I be aware that you are already with me? And here's the thing, friends, that when we're in the bullock yoke, we often can't turn our heads to see that there's someone right next to us. And if I can just sort of move slightly and see that there is a person and his name is Jesus, and he's looking into my eyes and he's saying, Nathan, stop trying to do this yourself. I'm right here. I've told you already that my yoke is easy. I'm in this with you, and you keep trying to do this yourself. And it's just killing us. At the beginning when I said, I only tried to prove myself and have no needs and just work harder and be useful, and our narratives just keep driving us, and suddenly we're in a famished land and we don't even know who we are anymore, but the burden is me. I'm now the burden. And Jesus says, Nathan, I'm here. Friends, he's sitting with you in your story, in your journey. You are not a self-constructed I. You are present to a God who is with you. Not just for you, not doing it to you, with you. Emmanuel. Coming to the end of your self-sufficiency is the first revelation of grace at work. I'm finishing up here, friends, but I need to tell you the last part of my story, don't I, with my friend. So he's shared, and we're sitting, and I'm just being present to the fact, and I know his story, and I'm sitting with the fact that he's feeling numb, that nothing I'm going to say is going to fix his dilemma. So my job isn't to fix my friend. So how am I going to be present to him? How am I going to listen? What's Jesus saying? Can I look over for just a second? And Jesus is eyeballing me, and he's going, Nathan, you're not on your own here. And my friend shares that he's come down to the community cafe that I managed for many years, and there's a young fella there who has an intellectual delay, and for the last 3 hours, my mate who's at the table with me has just been teaching him how to make coffee. He's standing next to him. He's helping him when he makes a bad coffee. He's encouraging him. He's supporting him. He's just loving on this young kid who doesn't have a dad, who's probably got no one in his life that's saying, you're doing a good job. Friends, how often do we just need someone to validate the fact that you're doing a good job? And I said to my friend, brother, you've just spent the last 3 hours, you the guy who's struggling at the moment physically, you the guy that is trying to find meaning in everywhere else, the surfing trip, you the guy that served your country for many years, and whatever we think about war, he's now living the consequences. And I said, what about if you're the gift? What about if it's not what you can do or what you have or what others say about you, as Nouwen says, but what about if it's actually your present, broken, surrendered self that's the gift? Friends, what about if you're the gift to your community? What about if you're the gift to a lonely person? What about if it's not something that you can do or something that you buy, or that's actually the presence of Christ in you, the aroma of Christ as you are present with another? Could that be the rest of God that he's talking about? And I'm not going to talk to it because I know I've gone too long. But hear this, friends, it's not for when we die. It's not just when we're on holidays, it's today. What about if Jesus was sitting with you right now and he was eyeballing you and he said, I've got this? What about if you're not a nobody and from nowhere, but what about if you're his? What about if you're found in him? You know what Jesus said to his disciples? I will not leave you as orphans. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you.